I realized my mother chose my sibling over me the day she pretended I didn't exist. Not at a funeral, not during a crisis, but at my own birthday dinner, while I sat right in front of her. People talk about favoritism like it's a harmless family quirk, like one child getting an extra cookie or a bigger bedroom. They don't talk about what it feels like when that favoritism shapes your entire life. My name is Alina, and for most of my childhood, I believed I was part of a normal family. 2 parents, 2 daughters, a modest home in a quiet suburban town where everyone waved politely and pretended nothing ugly ever happened behind closed doors. On the outside, we looked perfect. Inside, we were built on sibling rivalry so quiet and constant that it felt like background noise. My younger sister, Marissa, was the kind of person people instantly adored, effortlessly charming, beautiful without trying, the kind of girl teachers described as a joy to have in class and strangers called an old soul. I was dependable, responsible, invisible. Growing up, I told myself the difference didn't matter. Someone had to be the easy child, someone had to be the one who didn't cause problems, so I studied hard. I helped around the house, I made sure my parents never had to worry about me. And in return, I expected nothing more than love that was equal. Not more, not less, just equal. But equality never existed in our house. Not really. My mother never said she preferred Marissa. She didn't have to. Her actions spoke louder than any confession. When Marissa forgot her homework, it was because she was stressed. When I forgot mine once, I was irresponsible. When Marissa crashed the family car at 17, my parents bought her another within months. When my old laptop died during college finals, I was told to figure it out. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. Every family had a little favoritism, right? Every set of siblings experienced some degree of sibling rivalry. That's what I kept telling myself, right up until the night everything changed. Because family betrayal doesn't always arrive like a storm. Sometimes it builds slowly, quietly, over years, layer by layer, until the foundation cracks beneath your feet. By the time I reached my late 20s, Marissa and I were living very different lives. She stayed close to home, drifting between jobs but always landing safely because my parents cushioned every fall. I moved 3 states away, built my career from scratch, and paid my own bills without asking for help. From the outside, it looked like I had the better deal. Independence, stability, freedom. But what people don't understand is that independence can grow from neglect just as easily as strength, and neglect leaves marks you can't always see. When my mother called one evening and asked me to come home for a special family dinner, I thought, maybe foolishly, that things were finally changing. Maybe she missed me. Maybe she wanted to repair what years of quiet favoritism had damaged. I had no idea that dinner would become the clearest proof of family betrayal I had ever experienced, or that the slow burn of sibling rivalry would finally ignite into something that changed all of our lives. And I definitely didn't know that karma was already waiting at the table. Part 2. Setup deepens and early tension. I almost didn't go. Work was hectic, flights were expensive, and something in my gut felt off. But my mother rarely invited me home anymore, and when she did, it usually meant something important. So I booked the ticket. 3 days later, I was standing in my childhood bedroom staring at walls that still held pieces of a life I'd outgrown. Everything looked smaller. The bed, the desk, even the window I used to sit beside when I needed to escape. What hadn't changed was the feeling, that quiet, familiar awareness that I didn't quite belong there anymore. Downstairs, I could hear my mother and Marissa laughing in the kitchen. Their voices blended easily, like nothing had ever come between them. I stood at the top of the stairs for a moment, listening, waiting, half expecting someone to call my name. No one did. That was the first reminder of the old favoritism, subtle, familiar, still alive. When I finally walked into the kitchen, my mother glanced up with a smile that felt rehearsed. "Oh, you're awake," she said, as if I were a guest instead of her daughter. Marissa hugged me quickly, already scrolling through her phone. She smelled like expensive perfume I knew she hadn't paid for. "Big night tonight," she said brightly. "Mom's planning something special." I smiled back, trying not to overthink it, trying not to let years of quiet sibling rivalry cloud what might finally be a normal family moment. But small things kept happening. My mother asked Marissa what she wanted for dinner. She didn't ask me. Marissa mentioned she needed help with rent. My mother immediately offered to figure something out. When I talked about a promotion I'd just received, the room fell strangely quiet. My mother nodded politely, then changed the subject back to Marissa within seconds. It was the same old pattern, the same old favoritism dressed up as concern. Still, I told myself not to ruin the evening. Maybe tonight was meant to be different. Maybe this dinner was my mother's way of bridging the distance between us. By the time evening arrived, the dining room was set like it was Thanksgiving. Candles, wine glasses, even the good china my parents only used for important occasions. My father sat at the head of the table, unusually quiet. My mother hovered near the kitchen, adjusting plates that didn't need adjusting. Marissa looked almost excited. I should have realized then that this wasn't just a family dinner. It was an announcement. Halfway through the meal, my mother cleared her throat. "We have something to share," she said gently. Her hand reached for Marissa's, not mine. In that moment, a strange heaviness settled in my chest, the kind that appears right before family betrayal reveals itself. Marissa squeezed our mother's hand dramatically. "I didn't want to say anything until everything was finalized," she said, her voice trembling just enough to sound vulnerable. I glanced between them, confused. "What's going on?" My mother smiled at Marissa with pure pride, the kind of pride I'd spent my entire life chasing and never quite earning. "We're deciding to help your sister buy a house," she said. The words hung in the air. Simple, calm, devastating. At first, I thought I'd misheard. A house? Marissa didn't even have a stable job. She moved apartments every year. She borrowed money constantly and rarely paid it back. I waited for my mother to continue, to explain, to acknowledge how surreal this sounded. Instead, she looked directly at me and added the sentence that would fracture everything. "We're using the inheritance your grandmother left for both of you." Silence swallowed the room. And just like that, years of quiet favoritism and buried sibling rivalry transformed into something far more dangerous, something that felt unmistakably like family betrayal.
I stared at my mother, waiting for the rest of the sentence. There had to be more. An explanation, a clarification, something that would make this feel less like a punch to the chest. But nothing came. My father focused on his plate, cutting his food into careful, quiet pieces. Marissa wouldn't meet my eyes, and my mother just kept smiling, like she'd delivered wonderful news. "Wait," I said softly. "Grandma's inheritance? You mean the trust she set up for us?" My grandmother had been the only person in our family who treated us equally. When she passed away, she left a modest but meaningful inheritance, split evenly between Marissa and me. It wasn't enough to change our lives overnight, but it was supposed to be a safety net, a start, a symbol of fairness. "Yes," my mother said calmly. "We thought it would be best to use it now. Your sister needs stability." Needs stability. The words echoed inside my head. "And I don't?" I asked before I could stop myself. The room shifted, a subtle tightening of shoulders, the familiar discomfort that always appeared whenever I challenged the unspoken rules of our family. My mother sighed like I was being difficult. "You're doing well, Alina. You have a career, savings, you're independent." Each word felt less like praise and more like justification, a carefully constructed argument for why I deserved less. Marissa finally spoke, her voice soft and rehearsed. "It's not like we're taking anything from you. It's still family money." Family money. Except it wasn't being used for the family. It was being handed to her. I felt the old favoritism pressing in from every direction, thicker than ever. This wasn't just about money. It was about value. Who mattered more? Who was worth investing in? Who was always expected to understand and step aside? "I thought Grandma wanted it split equally," I said carefully. My voice sounded calm, too calm. My mother's expression hardened for a fraction of a second. Then she softened it again, like she always did when delivering something painful. "She did," she admitted, "but circumstances change. Your sister needs help now. You don't." There it was, the quiet confirmation of everything I'd suspected for years. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't a loan. They were giving Marissa both shares of the inheritance, mine included, to buy her a house I'd never be able to afford on my own anytime soon, a house funded by the one person who had ever truly treated me fairly. The weight of family betrayal settled deep in my chest. Not loud, not explosive, just heavy and undeniable. I looked at my father, hoping just once he might say something, defend me, acknowledge how wrong this felt. He didn't. "This will give Marissa a fresh start," he said quietly, still avoiding my gaze. "It's the right thing to do. The right thing for her." A lifetime of quiet sibling rivalries suddenly made sense. All the small moments, all the subtle choices, they had always been preparing to choose her. I felt something inside me begin to fracture. Not dramatically, just a slow, clean break. "So you already decided," I said. It wasn't a question, and no one at the table tried to pretend otherwise. My mother reached across the table, placing her hand over Marissa's again, a silent gesture of reassurance, of loyalty. Not once did she reach for mine. In that moment, the truth became impossible to ignore. This wasn't just favoritism anymore. It wasn't harmless sibling rivalry or misunderstanding. It was deliberate, calculated, a quiet but undeniable act of family betrayal. And for the first time in my life, I stopped trying to be the understanding daughter. I didn't argue. That was the part that surprised them the most. For years, I had played the role perfectly, calm, reasonable, endlessly understanding. The daughter who didn't make scenes, the one who absorbed every ounce of favoritism without letting it show. So when I simply sat there, calm and composed, they mistook it for acceptance. Inside, something was collapsing, not loudly, not dramatically, just a slow, silent cave-in of everything I'd believed about my family. "I see," I said finally. My mother relaxed almost instantly, like she'd been holding her breath. Marissa gave a small, relieved smile. My father reached for his wine glass. They thought the moment had passed, that the decision had been delivered and received. But what they didn't understand was this. When a person finally recognizes family betrayal, something fundamental shifts. You stop trying to earn love. You stop explaining your worth. And most importantly, you start seeing everything clearly. I excused myself from the table and walked upstairs. Each step felt strangely steady, like my body already knew what my mind was still processing. In my childhood bedroom, I closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed. For a moment, I just stared at my hands. I expected tears, anger, some dramatic emotional breakdown. Nothing came. Instead, there was a strange calm, the kind that appears when a truth you've avoided for years finally stands in front of you, undeniable. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't temporary favoritism or harmless sibling rivalry that would fade with time. My family had made a conscious choice, and they had chosen her. Memories started replaying in my mind, one after another. Every birthday where Marissa's mistakes were forgiven, every achievement of mine that went quietly acknowledged and quickly forgotten. Every moment I'd convinced myself that fairness would come eventually. It never had, and now it never would. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Before I could answer, my mother opened the door and stepped inside. She closed it gently behind her, like we were about to have a normal, caring conversation. "I hope you understand why we're doing this," she said. There was no apology in her voice, only expectation. I looked up at her, really looked at her. For the first time, I saw not just my mother, but a woman who had spent years justifying her choices. A woman so comfortable with favoritism that she no longer recognized it as unfair. "I do understand," I said quietly. Her shoulders relaxed again. Relief washed over her face so quickly it almost hurt to see. "I knew you would," she replied. "You've always been the strong one. The strong one, the reasonable one, the one who would sacrifice without complaint." That label had followed me my entire life, and in that moment, I realized it had never been a compliment. It had been permission. Permission for them to give more to Marissa, to expect less from me, to continue a pattern of family betrayal disguised as practicality. "I just have one question," I said. My mother nodded. "Of course." I held her gaze, steady and calm. "If Grandma knew you'd give my share to Marissa, do you think she would have wanted that?" For the first time that evening, my mother hesitated. Just a second, but it was enough. Because silence, in a moment like that, tells you everything. Something inside me finally gave way. Not in anger, not in tears, but in clarity. I wasn't going to fight for fairness anymore. I wasn't going to beg for equal treatment or compete in a lifetime of quiet sibling rivalry. If they wanted to choose her over me, I would let them. And that decision, calm, quiet, and invisible, would become the moment everything truly began to change.
I left the next morning without saying much. My mother hugged me at the door, relieved that I hadn't caused a scene. My father gave me an awkward pat on the shoulder. Marissa smiled like she'd just survived a minor inconvenience instead of participating in something that felt like family betrayal. "Love you," my mother said lightly. I smiled back. "Love you too." And for the first time in my life, I realized those words no longer carried the weight they once did. On the flight home, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I planned. Not revenge in the dramatic, explosive sense. No confrontations, no emotional outbursts. Just quiet decisions, small, deliberate ones that would reshape my life without them even noticing. Because here's what years of favoritism had taught me. The strongest moves are the ones no one sees coming. When I got back to my apartment, the first thing I did was call the attorney who handled my grandmother's estate. I kept my voice calm, professional. "I just need clarification on something," I said, "regarding the inheritance structure." He pulled up the documents within minutes, and what he told me changed everything. My grandmother hadn't left the money directly to my parents. She had placed it in a legally protected trust, specifically divided into 2 equal shares, one for me, one for Marissa. Neither share could be used without the named beneficiary's consent, mine included. I thanked him, hung up, and sat very still on my couch. So they hadn't technically taken my inheritance yet. They were planning to, assuming I would agree like I always had before. assuming I would be the understanding daughter, the easy one, the one shaped by years of quiet sibling rivalry and emotional conditioning. A slow, unfamiliar feeling spread through me. Not anger, power. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to family betrayal. I was observing it from a distance. Over the next few days, my phone buzzed constantly with cheerful messages from my mother, links to houses Marissa was considering, photos of neighborhoods, excited updates about mortgage meetings. Every message carried the same unspoken assumption: I would sign whatever they put in front of me. I responded politely, warmly, exactly how they expected. "That looks beautiful. I'm glad she's excited. Let me know what you need from me." Each message reinforced their confidence, their belief that the old patterns still held. Meanwhile, I gathered information quietly. I requested copies of every legal document related to the trust. I reviewed timelines, permissions, and restrictions. I spoke with a financial advisor about long-term implications. Not once did I mention any of this to my family. Because this wasn't about confrontation. It wasn't about proving a point or winning an argument shaped by decades of favoritism. It was about balance, about finally stepping out of a lifetime of silent sibling rivalry and choosing myself without apology. A week later, my mother called with unmistakable excitement in her voice. "We found the house," she said. "It's perfect. Marissa is in love with it." I could almost hear Marissa in the background, laughing, celebrating, already imagining a future built on something that didn't fully belong to her. "That's great," I said calmly. There was a brief pause. Then my mother added, gently but directly, "We just need your signature on the trust release forms." Of course they did. I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window as the late afternoon sun dipped low across the skyline. For years, I had accepted favoritism as something I simply had to endure, accepted family betrayal as an unfortunate but unavoidable part of loving them. Not anymore. "Send them over," I said softly, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the overlooked sister. I felt like someone who finally understood the value of her own name. The documents arrived the next morning, a neat digital package from my mother's email filled with cheerful exclamation points and heart emojis that felt strangely out of place next to legal paperwork. "We're so excited! This means everything to Marissa. Thank you for always being the understanding one." Understanding. That word again. I opened the files slowly, reading each page with careful attention. There it was, exactly as the attorney had described. A formal request to release my half of the trust so it could be combined with Marissa's share and transferred toward the down payment of her new house. My signature would make it happen instantly. Without it, nothing moved forward. For years, quiet favoritism had made me feel powerless, like I existed inside a system I couldn't change. Now I realized something important. The system only worked because I cooperated with it. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I waited. 2 days passed, then 3. My mother sent a gentle follow-up text. "Just checking if you received the documents, sweetheart." Sweetheart, a term she used most when she needed something. "I did," I replied, reviewing everything carefully. That answer bought me time and created the first ripple of uncertainty. By the end of the week, Marissa texted me directly for the first time in months. "Hey, Mom said you're looking over the paperwork. We're kind of on a timeline with the house, LOL." LOL. I stared at the message, struck by how casually she treated something that represented years of my grandmother's careful planning, years of my quiet acceptance in a family shaped by sibling rivalry and emotional conditioning. I replied calmly, "I understand. Big decisions deserve careful review." She didn't respond after that. Over the next several days, the tone of messages shifted. Excitement turned into mild anxiety, then subtle pressure. My mother called one evening, her voice wrapped in forced calm. "Is something wrong with the documents?" she asked. "No," I said. Everything looks clear. A pause. Then, so you'll sign? There it was, the assumption, the expectation built on decades of quiet compliance and normalized family betrayal. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my voice steady. I've been speaking with a financial advisor, just making sure I fully understand the long-term impact before releasing my portion. Silence filled the line. Not dramatic silence, just enough to signal that something had shifted. "You need an advisor for this?" my mother asked carefully. "It's a significant amount," I replied. "Grandma wanted it to support us both. I want to make sure I honor that." The mention of my grandmother landed exactly where I intended, a gentle reminder of the original fairness that had been quietly rewritten by years of favoritism. My mother's voice tightened slightly. "Well, of course, take your time." But beneath her politeness, I could hear it, the first crack in their certainty, the first sign that their plan might not unfold as smoothly as expected. Over the next week, the pressure intensified, subtly. More calls, more check-ins. Marissa's messages grew shorter, less friendly. The house they wanted suddenly had other interested buyers. Deadlines appeared, urgency built. And through it all, I remained calm, polite, unmoved, because this wasn't about punishing them. It wasn't about winning some dramatic battle fueled by years of sibling rivalry. It was about letting reality unfold, letting their own assumptions guide them towards consequences they never considered. For the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting to family betrayal. I was allowing space for something else to emerge, something quieter, more balanced. Something that looked a lot like karma slowly finding its way back to the surface. Part 7. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was angry, not yet, but because everything finally felt clear. For weeks, I had moved through this inheritance drama like someone walking through fog, sensing shapes but never fully seeing them. Now, the fog had lifted, and what stood in front of me wasn't confusion. It was a pattern. Careful decisions, quiet transfers, a narrative maintained for years, all under the surface of what looked like love and protection. Monday morning, I made the call, not to my mother, not to a lawyer recommended by family, to an independent estate attorney, someone with no connection to us, no emotional investment, no reason to soften the truth. His voice was calm, professional, direct. After verifying my identity and reviewing the trust documentation I'd sent over the weekend, he scheduled a private consultation. When we met 2 days later, I arrived with a folder so organized it almost felt clinical. Printed statements, distribution records, trust provisions, evidence. He reviewed everything slowly, occasionally highlighting sections or making notes in the margins. The silence stretched long enough to feel heavy. Finally, he set the papers down and folded his hands. "Legally speaking," he said carefully, "this situation falls into a very specific category." I sat still, forcing myself not to interrupt. "The trust was structured to allow your mother oversight and discretionary distribution until you turned 35. That part is not unusual," he continued. "However, transparency and fiduciary duty are still required." Fiduciary duty. The words felt precise, measured. If funds were distributed primarily for her benefit, and if you were not informed of the trust's existence or performance as the primary beneficiary, that raises serious ethical and potentially legal concerns. A slow wave of validation moved through me. Not satisfaction, not victory, just confirmation that this family betrayal wasn't something I had imagined or exaggerated. It was real. "What are my options?" I asked quietly. He met my gaze directly. "You could confront her privately and request full accounting and immediate transfer of management authority, or," he paused slightly, "you could initiate a formal audit and beneficiary protection process through the trust administration system." a formal process, documented, structured, irreversible once started. If I chose that path, it wouldn't be an emotional conversation anymore. It would become official, visible, permanent. I left his office with a clear plan and a strange sense of calm settling into my chest, because this revenge story was never going to be about shouting across a kitchen table. It was about truth, about restoring balance without destroying myself in the process. Over the next week, I gathered everything required: identity verification, beneficiary confirmation, formal request for full historical audit and management transition upon my 35th birthday, now less than 2 years away. Every form submitted through proper channels, every document timestamped, every request logged. No accusations, no confrontation, just process. The system, once activated, moved quietly but efficiently. Acknowledgement emails arrived, review timelines established, a notification prepared for all oversight parties involved, including my mother. I imagined the moment she would receive that formal notice, not from me, but from the trust administration itself. Neutral language, professional tone. Primary beneficiary has requested comprehensive review and transition planning. No emotion, no blame, just fact. For the first time since discovering everything, I felt steady, grounded, because this inheritance drama was no longer hidden inside private files and silent realizations. It was moving into the open, where narratives couldn't be reshaped so easily, where truth existed outside of anyone's control. And as I sealed the final envelope and submitted the last confirmation online, one thought settled quietly in my mind. Karma doesn't always arrive as chaos. Sometimes it arrives as paperwork. Part 8. Emotional Aftermath and Ending CTA. The notification reached her on a Thursday morning. I know because she called me exactly 11 minutes later. Her name lit up on my phone when I was standing in the grocery store staring at a shelf of cereal I didn't need. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Not out of fear, out of clarity, but I answered anyway. Her voice came through carefully controlled, too calm. I received a notice from the trust administration. No greeting, no warmth, just the issue. I leaned against the cart and kept my tone neutral. Okay. A long pause followed. Then, you initiated a formal audit. There it was. Not anger, yet, just surprise wrapped in restraint. Yes, I replied softly. As the primary beneficiary, I have that right. Silence stretched across the line. I could almost hear her recalculating, reframing, trying to find the version of events that would restore her control. This feels unnecessary, she said finally. Everything I've ever done has been for your stability, your future. The familiar language of protection. For a moment, I felt the old reflex rise, the urge to reassure her, to soften things, to make this easier. But I didn't, because this inheritance drama had never been about misunderstanding. It had been about information I was never given. I'm not accusing you of anything, I said carefully. I just want transparency and direct control moving forward. That's all. Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice held something new, not anger, not quite, something closer to realization. You could have talked to me first. I looked out at the store's glass windows, sunlight reflecting across the parking lot. I tried, I said quietly, for years, about money, about stability, about my future, and every time I was told not to worry. The words hung between us, because that was the heart of the family betrayal, not just the money, not just the trust, the quiet decisions made on my behalf without my knowledge, the years of being managed instead of included. He exhaled slowly. I was trying to protect you. I believe you, I replied, and I meant it. But protection without honesty still breaks trust. For the first time in the entire conversation, neither of us spoke. There was no explosion, no dramatic confession, no cinematic resolution, just two people standing on opposite sides of a truth that had finally surfaced. Over the next few weeks, everything unfolded through official channels. The audit confirmed what I had already seen: funds used, allocations justified under broad trust language, no criminal intent, but clear overreach in interpretation and transparency. Management transition planning began immediately. By the time I turned 35, full control of the remaining trust assets transferred directly to me. No ceremony, no confrontation, just signatures. And something surprising happened in the quiet that followed. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt free. Because the real resolution to this revenge story wasn't watching someone fall. It was stepping out of a dynamic that had quietly limited my life for years. With direct access to my resources, I made decisions I'd postponed for nearly a decade. I reduced my work hours, invested in a small business idea I'd once considered too risky, traveled without calculating every expense twice. Not recklessly, just intentionally. My relationship with my mother changed too. Not destroyed, not fully repaired, but honest in a way it had never been before. We spoke less frequently, more carefully, and slowly, over time, without ever formally acknowledging it, she stopped trying to manage my life, because she couldn't anymore. That's the strange thing about karma in any family betrayal. It doesn't always arrive as punishment. Sometimes it arrives as balance, as truth becoming visible, as control returning to where it always should have been. If you had discovered something like this, something hidden in your own life for years, would you have confronted it emotionally, or handled it quietly and let the truth speak for itself?